And I'll keep an eye on the questions, all that kind of good stuff. All right. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. Welcome to another Wiser webinar. We are going to have a long conversation, or an hour's long conversation, and we're going to unpack IoT, the Internet of Things, and where it was, where it is, and where it's going to be. Because yeah, there's some interesting stuff to go through on this one. So everybody knows me, so I'm going to shut the hell up. I will say thanks again, obviously, to the Wiser team, Gabrielle, and everybody else involved in this one. And now I'm going to shut up and I'm going to just hand off. We're going to have Amir first because he's in the middle of the night where his neck of the woods is. Go for it.
Thanks, Chris, and thanks for hosting me. Hello, Douglas and Robert. Great to be here. Short introduction about myself. Currently, I'm president, co-founder of CyberMDX. Been more than 20 years in the security industry, leading some of the national security program for the government in Israel, and the recent years working for the enterprise, getting into the enterprise industry. At CyberMDX, we are focusing on healthcare, providing risk management solution and security solution for the healthcare IoT, which I think is kind of related and interesting angle. And you know, overall, our philosophy is how to make the art of cybersecurity a science. So this is shortly about myself.
Awesome, thank you, sir. Douglas, sir, you're up.
Thank you so much for having me. It's nice to meet you all. I come at this from the software developer background. I actually started in data processing and just started finding myself in jobs where I was connecting remote systems, distributed systems, and you know, as far back as arguably 2003, doing some IoT stuff with lots and lots of remote devices and pet trackers before the iPhone came out. So it's like coming at this for a long time and sort of learning the hard way sometimes about security and realizing just what a big gap there is in the industry in terms of people having basic internet security, you know, at the enterprise level, and then seeing how that has just like cubed at the IoT level because of, you know, a variety of factors. But just happy to be here, and hopefully I can, you know, shed some light on a few things for people.
Robert, you're up, sir.
Thanks. Hopefully the feedback has resolved itself. Rob McNutt, CTO of Forescout. And for those who don't know, Forescout is a company looking to solve the challenges organizations face with IoT in the sense of being able to identify, segment, and enforce controls around those things. And you know, our view is as kind of the world's growth in devices come, they're mostly coming from the devices that don't have people sitting behind them, which means your ability to apply certain security and controls don't really apply to those types of devices. And as we're starting to see, as time goes on, more and more of those devices are becoming prone or target to attacks. Forescout has about 90 million devices under management, and of those 90 million, about 50% would be represented as what we would call IoT devices in today's kind of definition. So large amount of understanding and a large amount of intelligence on those things. Hopefully we can go through some of that today and talk about where we see that risk coming from and how we see it changing in the future.
Nice, appreciated. Actually, it's probably worth pointing out, I mean, we not just as an industry, but I think as people, as media, IoT has been bandied around for a while, like 20 odd years. And I think if we go back to when we first started in this whole idea, it was just, you know, Robert, to your point, it was just kind of a dumb sensor, it just sat out there and did something. And now, you know, we got 20, 30 billion devices out there, depending upon whose numbers and whose metrics you want to believe, of devices that are out there that are doing something. Some of them still relatively autonomous, and some of them, I mean, you know, I look around the home, I look around the lab space that I have here. You know, the lab space alone, I think, has 70 or 80 devices in it deliberately that we use for doing various different things with. And so, and some of them are autonomous and some of them are engaging devices and all sorts of other things. And the sphere and the scope, Douglas, to your point, has just expanded so much so that it's that now these things are just bringing in so much data and doing something with them. So I think the first question is, you know, we talk about this, we see this as an issue, but really, is it an issue? Are these devices here to help us? Are they good? Are they bad? Are they challenging? Or is it just a mix of all of the above? Amir, I'm actually going to start with you because you've got the healthcare side of the world. So I'm really freaking interested in that side of things from your aspects, if you don't mind.
Yes, yes, sure. So yes, I think as we've mentioned, it's IoT is, it became part of our lives, part of any organization operation, I would say. We see the prosperity and the huge growth of the IoTs. Healthcare, by the way, seems to be one of the leading industries in adapting overall IoTs. You consider everything, general purpose IoTs like cameras, unmanaged devices like printers, but also the medical devices, the critical devices. And it's amazing. By the way, the numbers that we are seeing currently in an average hospital is that more than 50% of the devices in hospitals are unmanaged devices, some kinds of IoTs, which is amazing, and 2% growth every month. So these are really amazing numbers. But I think looking at the healthcare, more than that, I would say in many cases, we're talking about really critical devices, medical devices. We can see their patients monitor, glucometers, imaging devices, radiology devices, and other critical devices. And I think overall using them and connecting them to the network, to the internet, create, and improve the healthcare efficiency, the ability to provide better healthcare services. So overall, I think it supports, the patient's treatment. So I think the cause is really good. But what comes with that is the exposure to risk and what we are seeing there. And I think it's typical, by the way, to the overall IoT devices, lots of challenges and, some basic security controls that are missing. In many cases, it starts with, we call it the shadow IoT, a blind spot of the organization for sure. They really cannot tell what they have in the network, and for sure the profile is not complete, which is, the very basic thing for any cyber security program. Limited security controls like endpoint security, legacy technologies that are falling short, and lots of, when it comes to large scale, you also see the operational challenges. And we'll get to that later probably, but who is managing what and how the process works. You have seen, I think, the recent events, just, the recent attacks that we have seen on hospitals in the last month on some of the large systems, which actually caused, unfortunately, a shutdown for radiology devices and system and imaging devices. And this is a growing trend. So healthcare is kind of the extreme, I would say, of IoT. And when you look, at the risk that we are seeing, it comes to the criticality of the devices, but on the other end, the risk that they impose on the network, the attack vector, increasing the attack surface. So overall, I think we can see this trend extremely in the healthcare, but more than that, overall in the IoT industry, like we have seen with other incidents that we've seen recently.
That's a nice wrap up and a nice summary on the healthcare side of it. We're going to go in the same order we just did the intros. Douglas, I'm intrigued on your side of things because obviously you come at this from, to some degree, kind of almost a kin side of it, from like the research, the attack, and about so I'm kind of intrigued on your side of things.
Yeah, I mean, first of all, I think everything that was just said is just absolutely spot on. The potential here is enormous in terms of improvements to quality of life and, savings. I'm on the ESG side, right? So right now I'm doing water savings. I don't think anybody's going to argue that that's not a net good. It's not a morally ambiguous cause, right? The problem is anytime you put a system out there, right, that system has to be secured or it becomes a potential bit of leverage for somebody else, okay? And so I think from my perspective, a lot like what happened when Linux came out, you lowered the sort of investment level for people to start doing things on enterprise scale, as opposed to having to get big iron Unix in. So there's a big explosion in innovation, right? And so today you have all of these off the shelf, really cheap, easily accessible components for people to start doing prototyping and innovation, and it's awesome. However, now we've also lowered sort of the initial investment level, and so as a result, there are more people doing things with devices who aren't necessarily ready to take full responsibility for all of that. And that goes a couple of ways. I think there's two big mindset shifts that I'm worried about. One is you have a lot of people who used to do embedded, and they're used to connecting to something like a CAN bus or RS-485, and all of a sudden they're putting stuff on the internet. Okay, so that's one mindset problem that is really big, because if you talk to embedded people, they're smart people, right? But they think that they're still in a friendly neighborhood. The other big problem is you have folks on the business side who are seeing this as selling a widget. They're not seeing it as operating a network.
Yeah.
Okay, so those are the two big things that I see in terms of great ideas, great innovation, but this is why we're exposing risk, because we're not doing that second step, right? That's my feeling. I mean, you can solve a lot of problems with the tech.
Yeah, that's a huge one. That's actually really interesting, and it's the business stuff I've seen too much. I think we can probably all agree. You know, an organization starts up with a really cool idea, makes a bunch of these things, doesn't necessarily consider all the implications from the security and safety side of things, and then they're like, well, and then literally it's somebody else's problem to deal with because they get acquired, bought out, or whatever. And it's like, oh, we're done, and yeah, poor Robert's sitting there going, I got another 1 million devices, and shit's about to hit the fan.
Yep.
So go for it. Good intro to you.
Thanks.
Yeah, I couldn't. When we kind of look at the populations of the things that we see or the things that the customers see, the insight into who manufactured them or what software was used on them, you know, it's very unclear. I mean, you know, you used to go to vendor X who made a specific type of device that you use in your plant or in your facility, and now you bought the new version of it, which, you know, has a network connection and has an IP address and now works over a modern network. But they didn't get there by innovating that way. They acquired some other technology and some other software stack to make that thing become internet enabled. Now, those stacks or those particular software packages that are used by many organizations out there to IP enable their hardware, their devices. Challenge is who is tracking the integrity of that software all the way through the supply chain down to who made the chip, who made the software, who made the drivers, so on and so forth. So when you kind of think, you know, the things we've had, printers, for example, you know, one of the kind of earliest versions of what we would call IoT today, the companies who made the printers made all the components and you kind of knew all the pieces. They made the firmware, they did everything. But now when you look, the vast quantity of things that are coming online aren't manufactured by the people who make the end use product, right? So if you're buying an MRI machine, historically, maybe you bought it from one manufacturer, but today you might have a couple vendors who make that MRI machine, sourcing components from other vendors out there to get that thing on the network. And same goes for access control systems, everything from building automation to weapon systems on a naval ship. The people who build the hardware and build the software aren't the same people who sell you the end product. So there's a lot of challenge in how do you now ensure that thing that's serving an important purpose in your business is secure when you don't know all the components that live under it. The second piece is the typical answer in the world of IT was to patch that thing, right? So for example, if you had a vulnerable Windows computer or Mac computer and you found there was something wrong with it or a high risk, you can do a couple things. You can install software on that thing, on that particular device to protect it, or you can patch it. A lot of the things we talk about in the world of IoT don't have additional software you can install, nor do they have patches that can be deployed. And sometimes to patch, you need to take down systems or plants or pipelines or things that can't be shut off. So the answer is not patch. The answer is protect the rest of the environment, control the blast radius, which is kind of changing the way we thought about protecting the network from within. So for what we see out there, we see the growth tremendously coming in the world of these types of devices. And we see the traditional ways to protect them and secure the rest of your network from them not able to meet that need. So what do? We have to kind of think of a new way to build our networks and modernize the way we've done things. And if you kind of think about it, the networks we're plugging these brand new types of things into are the same networks we plug things into for the last 40 years. The network really hasn't changed. The network hasn't adapted to supporting these new types of devices. And a lot of the technologies that have worked for Windows and Mac computers where people sat behind them don't just translate over to an IoT network, right? You have no way to validate who the user is or what the device is or any of that identity to ensure this thing should even be accessing the network. So there's a lot of elements here that play into the whole story. And really it's right now we're playing catch up to chase down and understand what are the ways we're going to secure these environments with this influx of devices. The devices are there and they're coming. It's now time to re-architect and reinvent the way we secure these networks from these devices and make sure they don't become the next point of entry or point of breach where somebody's in the front of the newspaper.
Let's talk about the network thing for a moment, because I want to unpack that one. The missile thing was actually a bit of a giggle. Feedback. The missile thing was a bit of a giggle because I did a talk, God, years ago at one of the earlier DerbyCons before that all closed down, when we went after the Patriot missile systems and good old third-party devices being made by third-party vendor IoT stuff. So it was kind of fun. But the perimeter thing, the network thing is interesting, because as we talk about IoT, it reminds me of the IT and OT side of the world. So the industrial control system, SCADA stuff. Once upon a time, we had those pretty well separated. Then some bright spark said, hey, let's plug them together, and didn't think of all of the bloody controls that we can put in place. Separation, segmentation, VLANing, all of the rules and regs, the fundamental basics of networking. We've kind of forgotten about that kind of stuff. Now, that won't fix everything, but I'd argue that some of those controls would be there if we actually implemented the bloody things properly, if being the operative word. Anybody want to unpack that one a little bit? By all means.
I would love to jump in there. I mean, it's a heck of a thing when you find that you've got an embedded Linux system somebody put out there, and they don't have IP tables enabled. It's on a public address, whatever it's going to be, and the easiest thing to do is to start doing what you said: network segmentation, VPN, VLAN, whatever it is. You can control traffic in and out so much more easily that way. The problem again becomes, this is almost a corporate culture problem, I think, is that you have organizations that say that they've got network management on one side and software development on the other. And I always bang away at this because I've seen it so many times where software engineers are asked to enable a feature, and they don't really have access to the kinds of infrastructure in their environment that they need to understand how those things are going to impact the implementation of that feature, right? So what do? As a natural human response is they just try to meet the request, right? Because that's the request that's been made. So it's sort of I think it's part of the inverse of was a Conway's law, that you get a system that looks like the structure of the organization that you work in, right? This is almost the opposite problem. Nobody can figure out what that structure is supposed to be that we're deploying to, so they just kind of don't use any of those tools. And there's no discussion between the people who are implementing the features and the people who know how to secure the infrastructure. And it's just sick that it feels like it's through the whole industry, that it's just so hard to get those conversations to happen.
Well, so that was a really good question that just came in from the folks listening, which is, are we going back to securing the perimeter? And I'm like, there is no perimeter. It went walkabouts a long time ago, and let's face it, the last year and a half of us, with most of us being stuck in homes and spaces, perimeter, I'm bugger that for a game of soldiers, Yeah. I mean, so actually that's interesting. Amir, I'm interested from your side of it, because obviously from the healthcare standpoint, you've got the patient healthcare side of things to concern by separation, segmentation. You've got apparently a crap ton load of IoT devices running around the place. What have you seen that's been effective or hasn't been effective, and what could and should be done?
Yes, it's a great question, and I think you've nailed it. The consolidation of the IT and OT in the case of healthcare, the medical devices, is very significant. Connectivity is all over the place. By the way, they need this consolidation because actually the medical devices are connecting with other IT systems. So it's kind of a necessity for them to have this connectivity, and it makes it even more challenging to keep the network hygiene, which is really important. And the most effective way that we have seen that tackle this barrier, and it's really a challenging issue, is what we are calling device-centric risk management. And the idea is really to wrap, the device, to put the device at the center, wrap the device with 3 layers of protection. The first layer of protection is what you can do on the device. It can be, as the guys mentioned, it can be patching, configuration, antivirus in some cases, but by the way, in some cases you cannot do that. And then it goes to the upper level, which is the network. This is the second layer. What you can do in the network. You can use block list, allow list, but these are some of the things that you can do on top of the actions that you can take on the device. And the third layer is actually the perimeter. Yes, by the way, in some cases, you're right, it's not always effective, but some of the medical devices needs, to have support. So they have connections, to the vendor's management system. So the idea is wrapping the devices, putting the devices in the center with the 3 layers: on device, network, and perimeter. And at the end of the day, nothing is bulletproof, but to have the best ROI on the actions that you can take on the devices. So the holistic.
Sorry, no, go on. Actually, I was going to say, to your point, and we carry on in a second. What I love just hearing is nothing is bulletproof, and I'm like, yes, because it isn't. And
Yes.
I get fed up so often. We're like, oh, we can protect you 100%. No, you can't. Snowball chance in hell. I'm going to get in. What are you going to do about it?
Yes, exactly. And this is the idea is really to find the right balance between what you can do. Lots of regulation on medical devices. In some cases, you cannot tell hospitals, just to install an agent and make them patched, because it will not work. They don't get this kind of assistance. It's complicated. So the idea is to provide these 3 layers to find the right balance. By the way, if you are aware about the vulnerability, you can see, what is the right balance. If it can be exploited from the perimeter, so you can close, some specific communications that coming from the perimeter. But it is really to wrap it and to create the right balance between those 3. It's what we are calling the integrative approach, putting the device in the center. I like this guy.
Thanks. Robert, I want you to hit this one, because obviously I'm intrigued from your standpoint, obviously from Forescout's standpoint, you've got those 3 things, the identify, the segment, and the enforce standpoint. So I'm intrigued how you see the world, whether it's the same as we're talking about, or you're like, gonna throw the bullshit flag, so go for it.
Yeah, you made a comment earlier about the IT and OT networks and air gap, and the things are separate. And when you start to look into that environment, the approach was separate the OT network, which we thought was highly important, from the IT network, which we deployed lots and lots and lots of security tools. So take the untrusted network or the network that was very important and keep it away from the network we spend a lot of money to protect. But at the same time, that OT network had tons of vendor access dialed into it. And I used to laugh as I would walk through a plant and they would tell me it's air gapped, and it was only air gapped from their own environment, not from all of the vendors. Were connected in, and you'd find LTE connections and DSL lines and all kinds of things where you had no idea who was connecting into that environment. And to Amir's point, some of these things, they need to be managed by third parties, but how do you assess the risk of that third party now? They become compromised. And we've seen this over and over and over again, where it's not the end person who causes the breach, it's somebody else that they're working with. It's that third party that is the weakest link. And I think we've come to the understanding that you're not going to stop yourself from being breached. It's control the blast radius, right? It's control how bad it can be. And the only way you do that is by wrapping bubbles around these things and making sure if they become compromised, they can't cause harm to anything else, and you can quickly isolate and remove and replace. The answer is not patch. I sit and do a lot of like M&A for companies and kind of evaluate. And I hear so many companies tell me how their solution is going to patch every IoT device out there, and I almost have to bite my lip a little bit and kind of think there's no way you're doing that, because I can't even patch everything in my house. And if I can download all the firmware, let alone automatically do it and deliver it everywhere, it's not believable. And as we grow and add more and more of these things, there is not one recipe to fix them all or protect them all or repair them all. It's protect the rest of the environment from that thing, because that thing will be the one that is the entry point. And just make sure if it gets compromised, or when it gets compromised, doesn't break anything else, and you throw it away and put a new one in.
Yeah, that's the best thing. That's it's funny. I'm just thinking about embedded devices, and a lot of people build devices where they actually blow a fuse to prevent any rewrites to the memory. So you can't patch that device at that point. That's actually standard practice. So people do deploy devices that are intentionally not patchable. So for them to say that is kind of farcical.
I mean, it was the same stuff, Robert, to your point, with the OT stuff. I mean, there's stuff out there that's got like the same level of memory that we were using like ZX81s 40 years ago. I mean, you can't even breathe on the damn stuff, let alone going anywhere with a patch. It's like, we just have to deal with it. We'll do what we can with it. We'll put a set of rules and regs in place, and then when shit does hit the fan, we know what we have to do to compensate and put controls and everything else. It's okay. I'm gonna hit this one, and you can all wince if you want, but it is a good, interesting question, because, well, it's an interesting question. Does zero trust model work in an OT setting? Anybody want to hit that one?
I'll jump in there. zero trust is it's a strategy. And if you boil it down, it's give each thing the minimum level of access and permission it needs to do its job. And that's really what it boils down to. And absolutely, does it work in OT? Because if you look at the OT kind of Purdue model and the structuring of how you're supposed to treat things, you're supposed to graduate up their access through the different layers based on what it needs to do to go up to those higher layers, right? And there are firewalls in between each layer. So I think almost zero trust came from the world of looking at OT and assuming that nothing can be trusted because there's nobody behind it to trust. And now we apply that to the IT world. And you know, if we look at most networks today, the segmentation in a modern IT network is by floor or by voice VLAN and computer VLAN. There's nothing beyond that. But in the world of OT, you have a lot of segmentation, a lot of compartmentalization based on systems and the layers within those systems. So absolutely, but zero trust is not a product you buy. I always tell everybody this. So you don't go and like call, I'm not gonna name drop any vendors here because I'm sure I'll aggravate them. You don't call up your firewall network vendor and say, I need your latest zero trust product. It's a strategy you implement, and you implement it across every domain, across your cloud, across your 5G network, across your OT network, across your work from anywhere people. You know, it's a mantra, right? You don't just install the latest zero trust agent from vendor X and say, okay, we're good.
Thank you. I can't say any more than that. If I could reach through the damn screen and hug you, I probably would at this point in time, because I am fed up with it being taken as a marketing as opposed to a philosophy as to how you approach something. So yeah, so thank you. All right, what do we want to go through? Let's have a look. We've got some good questions on this one. How do we, okay, let's talk about awareness. Let's talk about understanding and awareness. Amir, I want to throw this one back at you for a second, if you don't mind. And go back to the healthcare space. You said you're increasing the number of devices by 2% or so. Is that a month?
A month, yes.
How the hell do you find them all?
Yes, it's a great question. Probably, the first challenge, and I'm always, saying that the basic use case that you need to start is the onboarding and building the first inventory. When you're looking, currently at hospitals, you might find that they have dozens of thousands, large system even more than that, of devices. So, in the past, you could have manual inventory, and, just, following the process, not talking about, afterwards, understanding the risk that you have on these devices. So very basically, you need to use kind of a solution that can automate the process. But before any kind of solution, you should have, the right workflows in the organization. And it starts firstly with onboarding a device. You should have a policy of how you are onboarding a device, and then how you are building your first inventory, and then the ongoing risk management. I would add to that additional step, which is new vulnerability, because it's a very dynamic world, and new vulnerabilities will come every week, every day. So the idea is to have these processes and around them the policies. This is the way that you'll be able to track them. Usually you'll need to use some kind of platform when it comes to large scale to automate the process. It's inevitable. But this is the basic process that you need to follow: onboarding your device, building the inventory, and the ongoing risk management, and dealing with a new vulnerability. Yeah. All this together can help you. Regarding the awareness, it is really a very significant thing that we have seen. There are many stakeholders that are involved around the IoTs, the operations, the users. When we're talking about healthcare, the operations will come to the clinical engineer, the guys that are actually responsible for the medical devices. And then there are the IT and the security team, which are all involved. So it's very challenging. I think the awareness and the education about understanding how everyone should contribute to the process and how they should work together. Usually what we have seen really effective is that there is someone which is responsible to coordinate and to manage the security program for these devices. It can make, a significant change. And then, at the end of the day, each one of them should be educated, understand the implications, and understand that these machines are actually computers. You are connecting to the network with the limitations that we have just talked about. They weren't designed to be connected, actually. And once the education, which is the first layer, is there, and you have the process and you set the policies around it, usually this is the place that you streamline the process. So I'm not saying it will solve everything, but it will streamline the basic processes around these devices. And then, you'll get some control. In some cases, just, you pour these devices into the network and no one really knows what you have in the network. So this is basically where it should start.
Douglas, give me your thoughts on this one. Obviously, coming at it from a different angle, I'm kind of intrigued where you see things on this.
Well, when you said awareness, I actually felt awareness of the fact that you're deploying into an antagonistic environment. I think that is the primary thing that the average, again, it's most people are nice people. We got into this a little bit before we went on, but I recall presenting just some basic security stuff to a group of enterprise developers maybe 8 years ago. And I started talking about just the process of identifying what might be some things that we're already doing that aren't right. And as I started talking through an exploit that I might use internally, if I were a disgruntled employee, I started getting all these really bizarre looks like, well, there's something wrong with you, man. How could you possibly think that way? So it's a little bit of a hard thing psychologically, but I think as people sort of, maybe instead of being suspicious, maybe we could start motivating more self-interest in people to get educated on this stuff. And I think liability is a big thing that is going to come up in the next 5 to 10 years, because more and more of the deployment of devices, by profit-seeking enterprises or public enterprises is going to result in exploits. And when the liability isn't there, there's no fire under people's butts to be aware of these problems. They can safely ignore them. So I really kind of just want to drive that kind of thinking, because I think liability is you're not going to convince people until it's in their self-interest for a lot of these folks. So maybe that's the way we can do it. I don't know.
I'm intrigued on that one because I'll be honest, I want to believe that, but in my own opinion, PCI, HIPAA, FERC, NERC, SOX, GLBA, all that has done nothing more than add more paperwork, more complexity, and more cost to the consumer.
You're right, and it has solved nothing. What is, it's just another set of things that people are getting into box checking exercises about. I'm sorry, I shouldn't say that. I shouldn't say that.
But it's true. It's true. Unfortunately, okay. It's true. Here's what I want. I want dead bodies. I want more dead bodies. When you're tripping over dead bodies to get to your keyboard, you might actually start to pay attention. I don't know if and actually, Robert, you're sitting on a pile of data from all these devices you guys have got eyes on. How do we deal with this? Is it a regulatory thing? Is it, we've already seen pipelines, we've seen hospitals being taken, we've seen all sorts of shit happen. And yet we're not slowing down, we're not doing anything. Matt put a good question, it's like, do we need regulations to slow it down? We're seeing the same issues. What do we do? How do we actually address this?
No, you're actually speeding up. Amir mentioned kind of 2% growth in the healthcare space, and it's actually going to grow even faster. When you kind of look as organizations come out of the pandemic kind of freeze and they start to thaw, they're going to start to use more and more automation, and especially in the supply chain, right? So you're going to see more autonomous things happening. Everybody probably experienced the shortage of toilet paper and paper towels and who knows what else, right? It was because people couldn't drive the trucks and people couldn't work at the plant. People are going to be removed from the equation, and more things are going to push those products along. And those companies can't afford to have this happen again, and they kind of had a light shown. So the question is, how do you fix this? Because we're certainly adding more and more, and we're increasing the risk. The answer needs to come down more towards best practices around how these things are architected and built. And when you look at Windows, for example, or any operating system that's been around for 20, 30 years, instead of requiring secure build, it's let's open a market to a lot more vendors to add on things. And we look at the Windows security market, and there's like 10,000 companies that make a software agent you can install on Windows to make you a little bit more secure. Yet we still have ransomware come popping up and taking down pipelines, right, and taking down whatever else it can get to. The answer needs to be unilaterally built-in security, and that's one of the answers, right? There's no silver bullet, there's no fix-it-all, But there are so many things that you see get manufactured that don't have strong authentication, don't use encryption. Like one glaring thing in healthcare, and Amir, you probably know this and know this well. Mostly all the traffic that gets sent across from these devices is unencrypted, right? It doesn't use any actual payload encryption. So we think, we've got HIPAA, we've got rules in place to protect patient information, yet all of the information is typically transmitted over the network, where your Gmail account is more secure, your email that you're sending, your Twitter post is more secure than the MRI image that's being sent over a protocol that's unencrypted. I mean, we know this because we parse all these protocols and extract the information and use it to identify things, but in most modern worlds, most modern scenarios, you should not be able to do that. You should not be able to sniff traffic and understand all of the data that is inside of that traffic. And that right there is a glaring problem, that we allow these manufacturers to produce these devices and not even use industry standard off-the-shelf encryption or industry standard off-the-shelf protocols that have been proven to be secure. We have hundreds and hundreds of different vendor manufactured protocols that are running over the Ethernet networks or IP networks, all of which have different structures, different payloads, different datagram structures, and they're each set up differently. Yet we have real secure protocols like HTTP, with TLS and all these different layers that aren't being used. So why are we not forcing this as the standard for communication, right? I mean, that's where you start level one. Let Windows and that mess over there solve itself. But when we talk about IoT and the things that actually control process, there are some basic things that need to be done that aren't being done, and it's kind of scary, right? When you kind of think, even in the world of systems, the commands sent to launch a missile are sent unencrypted with no integrity validation, and whoever's on that network can send that command. And in nuclear power plants, the fan speed that controls how much we want to cool a reactor, it's sent over a clear text over the wire. I mean, these are basic things. If I tell people some of these things, they're like, that's crazy. Yet you can tweet with the highest security on it.
Yeah, it's that thing. A really good guy I worked with years and years ago said, whenever you see Telnet, you know that the person who set it up thinks that everybody's a friendly. And that used to be the case. And we just got to hammer on people who are designing these systems that you must assume that you're deploying to an antagonistic environment, because you are.
But to me, it's more than that. So the irony of this whole thing is, after we finish here, I've got about a 30-minute break, and then I'm doing the pre-recorded session for RSA DevSecOps. So I'm doing my session for them. And to me, that we need more of that. We need the development, security, and operations to work hand in hand, glove in glove, seat next to each other, whatever the hell it needs to be. To Robert's point, and Douglas, to your point, it's very much a case of assume the worst. We're humans and we like to think nice. No, screw that. Sorry, 7.5 billion people on the planet. There are lots of people out there who want your system. And I think, you look at the developer, to your point, the engineer who's like, hey, I just built this. No, not a good excuse anymore. Here's the new reality, and security needs to be able to have those conversations to operations and to development, and vice versa. And we've all got to be in the same freaking direction for a change. That, to me, is one of the biggest fundamental changes that we can bring to the table.
And Chris, I think spot on. And there is a shift of paradigm, because what you've mentioned when it comes to the place that there are also physical implications. These devices are becoming, mission critical. We are seeing that again in healthcare. And it relates to what Robert also mentioned about how things are constructed. But two trends that worth mentioning, and I think you were referring at the beginning of the question, Chris, regarding the accountability. So we are seeing, and in the healthcare, that the executive team, the board, and also CEOs are taking responsibility. By the way, interesting research that was published by Gartner just recently, that they anticipate that by 2024, 70% of the CEO will be held personally responsible for attacks on what they are calling the cyber-physical systems. And I think they're right. We are reaching to a point that it is part of managing your business, the operation of the business. So I think the integrative approach of how all the different stakeholders are working together will become also part of the CEO agenda. And we are seeing, CEOs that are in hospitals for sure that are taking, proactive approach. By the way, they are getting reports in the board. They see it as part of, the business and the operation. The other thing, I think Robin mentioned that, is the vendor's responsibility. And again, it's all working together, but I think a new regulation in California just recently, a new California Consumer Privacy Act, which was, I think, issued at the beginning of the year, is actually stating about the security law for all the connected equipment for the vendors, which they should accommodate. Lots of gray areas there about what is reasonable efforts that they should have, but I would say, it's a signal. So California is starting kind of, signaling vendors you should take also responsibility. Those are two trends that we'll see growing. And as you've said, you should assume that there are some people that will abuse this advancement in the technologies. Hopefully these trends will help, to provide a more collaborative approach from the different stakeholders to address these challenges that we are seeing.
A really good question that just came up here, and I'm actually just typing out the answer as you were talking as well, which was from Melissa, which is like, hey, a trip to the doctor is not only expensive, but rather insecure. Is there anything patients can do to better secure and advocate for their own health security at doctor's office? I'm actually shooting an answer back, which is, to me, it's ask more questions. It's don't just, when they hand you that HIPAA form going, hey, we look after your healthcare, ask them how. What are you doing? How are you looking after it? How that computer you're typing in, does it have encryption on it? How's it being monitored? What's it been? And don't take I don't know for an answer. If you don't know, it means you haven't been trained, which means we have an issue. And take your money elsewhere. Take your business elsewhere. Go somewhere else. It's the same thing with retail. To me, it's like, if I'm handing you my card, I want to know what you're doing to look after this. It's I won't have an Alexa in there. Oh, we got the finally got around to putting in some of those the Apple the HomePod things. I got a network monitor on those, watching the amount of bloody traffic those things are doing. It literally, I got my own little listening station. It's kind of cute. But we don't ask those questions. We like the convenience, but we don't ask questions. And to me, the human, every single one of us should ask more questions. And I don't know how we get people to do that. I'm not sure. Accountability. Amir, to your point, it's accountability.
It comes down to the individual people, right? I mean, you get a lot of skeptics out there thinking somebody's always trying to listen to them or track them, and concerns about being tracked, yet they're the first person to walk around with an Android phone and don't realize that you volunteered for this. You are volunteering all the things that anybody who wants to track you already knows. I mean, they don't have to do it for you. You're doing it for them. So it's more of an education thing. And coming back to the healthcare, I always laugh because HIPAA was structured in a way assuming technology was never going to be used in healthcare, because we have all of these check marks and forms to sign, but there is no obligation for these companies to secure the databases or the systems that they keep this data on, because that's where it's the treasure trove. It's where all of the data that is supposed to be protected and chain of custody gets to, and then it's exploited and everything is lost. So it's interesting that we solve the wrong problems in society. We solve the problems by creating fake facades of regulation to make people think they're safe, but in reality, the underlying things we've trusted so much are the biggest weakest link. I mean, you trust, when you drive a car, a lot of the systems, when you press on the gas or step on the brake, those are all things that are controlled by a computer now, right? I mean, it's called drive-by-wire. You're not even controlling the steering anymore. You're controlling a computer that is controlling the steering, and the same for brakes and gas. None of this stuff is the old cabling. It's all computerized now, and you're trusting the CAN bus in a car to send those signals and not be compromised, and stop when it has to stop, and accelerate when it has to accelerate, and turn left when you have to.
What's in the car is actually a really, really good one, because I was talking to a friend the other day, and they were talking about the shortage of trucks in the US. And I'm like, you realize every single one of those cars is a small to medium business. Every single one of those cars is about 100, anywhere from like 70 to 120, 130 individual computer systems running around one set of 4 tires or 6 tires in some cases. I'm like, and they're like, no. I'm like, yes. And I actually ended up breaking it, because we've been hacking cars for more years than I care to think of. And so you start breaking it down. I'm like, that's just a bloody car. Now you take that whole same concept and put it into a single house. Well, I've only got 2 computers at home. No, you haven't. Your HVAC system, and you're this system, and you're this, and your TVs, and you're this, and you're this. And I mean, you start, and they're like, stop. I'm like, no, every single one of these locations is a small to medium business, and we don't treat it that way. We don't think of it that way. And again, to me, it comes down to the human education. It's kind of why I like, the wiser thing is, that's why I like doing this through the wiser side of it, because it is that, how do we educate people? How do we get people to think a little bit more? How do we get people to actually, when they go into the healthcare facility, or when they look in Best Buy, when they're looking at these devices, Douglas, that you're building and that your team's putting together, how do we help them understand what questions to ask? Now, that to me is the big one, is on that one. Is like, what do we do on that one? Uh-oh, we've got a blockchain question.
I certainly don't think we need to put on the questions that will be asked will never be answered properly, and the follow-on answers won't be able to be consumed by most people. I think it needs to start with the suppliers and the people making these things, because if I tell my mother-in-law to go and ask all these questions next time she goes to Best Buy, they're either going to tell her yes, they're going to tell her whatever she needs to hear to go and transact, and then it's going to become my problem when it gets home. And it really just boils down to, let's start with creating secure building of these things, right? I mean, just simple 2-factor on every account out there. Everything you get as a cloud account, let's do 2-factor. Is it that hard? I mean, that's like, there's so many things that I still use that don't even offer it, and it's or the simple thing like.
Yeah, but I'm sorry, I just want to interrupt, because I know that argument starts at the project management level, where they're trying to get a product out the door in 18 months. And they push that down, and a manager signs off on it, and then you have a developer who throws up his hands and says, I don't know how to do 2-factor. Well, I guess I'll just skip it. It just sucks. Like, I just think it's just one of the things that sucks about trying to be security first. You really have to have a thick skin. You have to be willing to manage up a lot, and that's not really something that works well in the software field.
It doesn't work well in most. I mean, it doesn't work well. It doesn't work well in most fields. Especially, it's like, okay, you got a VC breathing down your neck. You've got a widget that you're trying to get out, and unfortunately, it's that, which one of this triangle do you want? Do you want it now? Do you want it secure, or do you want it, whatever the hell that triad is? But pick two.
Cheap, fast, or secure. Pick 2, right?
Yeah, there we go. Thank you.
Yes.
And more often than not, I want it cheap, I want it fast, and we'll deal with security later when we've got the funds coming in to build it. And that to me is a fundamental problem. And we got supply and demand. So we've got consumers that want more products. We got consumers that want more smart things. And we're the ones sitting there going, yeah, you're gonna have more dead bodies soon, people. And I don't know. Until we have more dead bodies, I don't think much is going to change. Let's face it. I mean, that's part of the problem. That's the only way we change in this country is, we had it with vehicles. We've had it with airplanes. Let's be perfectly honest. Crash a couple of them, people finally pay attention.
Yes.
I want to add another angle to that. To me, the way that I see it, programmers, software engineers, it's part of, their professional skill sets about how they're writing their code. And security is part of that, okay? It's very basic. And if you educate, this is the way that you educate, it will become, the nature of their code. How they, they're doing the security controls and how they're writing the codes. By the way, bad code is exploitable. We know that, okay? Mm-hmm. So I think it comes also to the new generation, I would say, of programmers. Security is a built-in issue. It's part of how if you are, you're writing a good code, high quality code, security should be part of that. The way that you do a design review, code review for that, it should be part of that. So hopefully, the new generation of software engineer, it should be something that is part of, their, I would say, development cycle. And I would like to see that, coming into place and being just, integral part of their development cycle.
Should is the key word, but I made this observation about a week ago that I think somewhere between the .com bust and around around 2008, somewhere in there, software jobs became office jobs. They were no longer the domain of the engineer hacker who really wanted to understand things. And I've talked to some people who came out of code school recently, and they had no education at all in security. So it's a scary, I completely agree with what you said. I completely agree with it, should. But what's actually happening is because security does not immediately translate to feature, and feature translates to revenue, it's not going to be fixed until we get to Chris's point. It's how do we motivate this and get people to change the attitude?
Yeah, it's a tough one. I don't think there's an easy solution. I mean, I do like what I would love to see, and I can only relate to like the English side of the world. So in the UK, you used to have what the British kite mark, and it literally was this little kite shape, and if you got the thumbs up, you got the kite mark, which meant your product was safe to use. We had it on electricity. It's like, okay, I've got a plug. Can I use it? If I plug it in, is it going to kill me? And it was kind of an instant reaction when you think about it. It's like, plug it in, it doesn't have a kite mark, it's going to blow up in my face. Does it have a kite mark? I'm in good shape.
Yeah.
To me, we almost need to educate consumers on that same thing. How do we grade something? You know, if you bring Alexa into the house, have you increased your risk level? If you bring in a smart blind system, have you increased or decreased risk? If I run a certain type of smarter car, what are my risks? You know, and to me, I think what I would love to see, and I think it would force change, and it would, to me, it would force change much more than regulation, which says thou shalt not, because that's going to take 5-10 years to get through. I really want developers to be educated, but to me, it's development and security and operations working together. It's the only way this is going to work. I want to see a kite mark. I want to see a safety mark, and I want to see it front and center. Now, it isn't going to stop anything because we have the same thing on freaking cigarettes. This product is going to kill you, and we still smoke the stupid things. I mean, seriously, it's going to fucking kill you, and we still buy it. Okay, you know, whereas if I put something like that on a plug that's an extender and it says, hey, you know, this product's going to kill you, you might think twice. I don't know, just something to think on. We have an American kite mark. I don't know what you would use over here.
Well, we have the UL with Underwriters Labs.
Yeah, but I want something. It needs to be quick, simple, easy, effective. Quite honestly, it needs a bunch of bloody hackers sitting around in a building figuring it out. In comes the product, out comes certification or not. And there's no.
So like a room full of 100 crazy white hats all trying to break shit to kill people, and
nothing will come out the other end. We'd be sitting there like idiots.
But it might be it took these 100 guys an hour to kill somebody. Right?
Yeah, there we go. Yeah.
Hours, right?
How safe is this? You're going to last an hour, or you're going to get a day's worth? Oh dear, this is all right. I've realized we're getting to the top of the hour, and we've just decided to kill off the audience. I apologize.
Good point, Chris. When you buy a hard drive, there's a mean time before failure rating on there that they have to provide. Maybe IoT manufacturers need to put a mean time before compromise, right? And how long will they?
Yeah.
They give you that crazy like $1 million warranty if you something breaks. Like there should be something along the lines like that. Like maybe put the owner.
Accountability. Again, back to what Amir was saying, accountability. Because let's be honest, unfortunately, inside our industry, there's a huge lack of accountability. We all come out there and say, hey, we will look after you, we will secure you, we will do all these wonderful things. And yet when it doesn't happen, we're like, oh, you didn't install it properly. It's such a shame. And we're now going to charge you twice as much to put it right again. All right, we better wrap up because we're hitting the top of the hour. I'm going to shut up for a second, and I'll reverse the order in this way around. Robert, if you wouldn't mind closing thoughts, closing remarks, all those kind of good things. You're on mute, and that wasn't my fault. I didn't do it this time.
One day we'll figure these meetings out. I just wanted to say thank you for the time. It's great to get everybody together and talk about this topic. It is certainly, I think, at the beginning phases of what will someday become a very large, monumental challenge for the world. We're starting to see the end or the tail end of the big threats against computers that have been around for 30, 40 years and operating systems that have been around for a long time. These IoT devices have not really been a target, but now as they start to become more critical to infrastructure and critical to our way of life, we're going to start to see those become the next big targets, right? And certainly a topic of interest for us, Forescout, as well as I think a lot of other companies out there trying to solve this. And you know, let's work together and try to make the world a better place by making these things more secure.
Thanks, Robert. Much appreciated. Douglas, sir?
Just enormously appreciative of the opportunity to be here and hear some really smart people talk. Anybody out there who is not sure, ask. There's people here who are just sharing information. If you're not sure, ask. There's nothing wrong with asking. There's nothing wrong with not knowing.
Totally. And so bloody right on that one, and pleasure as well. Amir, sir?
Yes, it was a great discussion. I think we are at the beginning of the revolution, as Robert mentioned. And what I would suggest, you know, on top of the liability for the business themselves, the enterprise organization, take control and adapt risk-based approach. This is the only way to approach, you know, this large-scale problem. And thanks for hosting us, Chris. It was a great discussion.
Welcome. Yeah, no, thanks again, as always, to Wiser. Amir, Douglas, Robert, thank you very, very much for having you. For everybody that hung out for the amazing questions. We got to most of them, but then a whole bunch came in towards the end, so I apologize. To everybody listening, stay safe, stay healthy, and take care. Amir, keep your head down, please. And thank you very, very much. Absolute pleasure, absolute honor having you all on. Take care and have a good one, everybody.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.